Steele. We'll be hearing from him later. But Rob, you want to tell us a little of what's going on with Senate too? Or am I going to ruin your presentation?
No. We're answering questions, aren't we, today?
Oh, I don't know. Demetrius is in charge of that.
It depends on my mood, Rob. Depends on my mood.
No presentations. Yeah, no presentations.
Yeah, there we go. That sounds great. A little bit about Senate. We're a design builder, business for 30 years, 100% commercial. We specialize in industrial buildings, and we work 100% in the private marketplace. We've got a couple of great projects that are just wrapping up. One is a 74,000 square foot addition onto Technor Apex in Leominster. This is all 100% in the warehousing distribution aspect. They make garden hoses, but we have a couple of others like that going around. I think the biggest challenge we're facing, probably like most of you here, is what we're going to talk about today. And COVID has changed, and not in a good way, some of the time that's taking to permit projects, get projects approved by cities, towns. It's impacted that. And as this new distribution phenomenon continues to grow, we're going to need to work a lot smarter to get these projects in place sooner rather than later. And I think that will help this particular area become more marketable and compete against other parts of the state, and luring the Amazons and the others that are coming to the area.
Great, thank you. And I look forward to hearing more too. And again, well, I was going to bring Eric into the conversation, but I think he's got another conversation going on at the same time. George.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Hi, good morning.
Hey, George.
Good morning.
Had a late night. Reading, I'm a town meeting member in Reading, and they were hung up on discussions of the stretch energy code, which I guess Reading is way behind. I see even the town of Acton did it 10 years ago. So, but anyway, Rob, you made a comment about the delays in permitting, and I thought from some of our prior conversations on these Middlesex 3 meetings that the towns are stepping up and speeding up the permitting process. So I'm disappointed to hear that, because I think this is an opportunity to change the paradigm on this whole bit and get more active in terms of having greater flexibility, so that businesses and towns are working together to make things happen. Because I think that's something that I hope we get out of all the badness of the COVID, is that we improve the going forward process.
George, I would have to say my experience has been there has been a more efficient approach, and I don't know if that's because of the remote access and that you don't get a lot of extraneous discussions at meetings. People tend to focus. Where it becomes a little prolonged, and I fully understand it, municipalities are reluctant to make a decision at one meeting. That because you'll do a presentation, there'll be questions, there are no issues, but they want to give it a period of time in case someone is not technologically proficient to weigh in, so they will automatically continue into a future meeting. But in all honesty, you build that into your timeline when you advise clients. But I think you're going to see municipalities be more attentive, because those who are in municipalities are going to have a shock when their budgets start to really feel the pinch.
And to your point, Bob, I think that'll be a selling point for towns, municipalities.
Right.
You can provide a streamlined process if for the need of that particular business, you identify areas within your town or city where it's going to be welcomed within zoning, within the architectural standards, what have you. That's what's really going to help us streamline it.
Right.
Well, it's interesting, because it just seems like, and I have a feeling this is going to be the same through all of these webinars. Is there's kind of it's a three-way balance between like needs, wants, and logistics. right? It's like the needs of the society, what we need, the wants of the developers and the companies, and the logistics of the towns, and how do you balance those three things? And that seems to be kind of the overall conversation that we seem to be having on each one of these webinars. It's like the developers want to do this, we find a need for this, but the town needs to figure out how they can balance your logistics and do this and that. And it's kind of an interesting thing if you look at it that way.
So our webinar has not started quite yet. We're still in the networking part, even though, but I do want to bring Steve into the conversation because he is part of our panel as well too. So Steve, thank you for joining us. And I want to do really a quick sound check because I know we are going to start in a few minutes. But how's everything going at Farley White? Without giving away your discussions for the webinar.
The things at Farley White are going well. I think we continue to be on our toes, and the current environment tests us on a daily basis. So it is an exciting time to be alive.
Wonderful. That's enough to just start the.
Steve, the emphasis is on being alive. Let's all try to stay that way.
We'll get through this. We'll get through this. We just have to get through it with a smile as well too. So I think with that, I know we got a number of people who are joining us as well too, but I think maybe we should move over. Oh, okay, I guess we should move over to the webinar part. So we'll wrap up the conversation and kind of we're going to move everybody over from attending the meeting to the webinar. So then you'll all be off screen with the exception of our panel, so everyone can enjoy their lunch while we're listening to the discussion. So. I'll start first by thanking everyone for coming, for attending today's webinar. I'm Stephanie Cronin. I'm the Executive Director of the Middlesex 3 Coalition. And for those of you who don't know the coalition, we're a public-private partnership where we bring stakeholders together to address business development concerns that are difficult for one community or one company to address and to improve economic development along the Route 3 corridor. I'm not going to spend any more time on the coalition. Really, we'll put some information in our chat about the coalition and some of our future events as well too. But what I'd like to do is, and then we'll reach out to our non-members too, because we are interested. Okay, actually, we do have information on some of our upcoming events with our real estate series. These are our future industries that we're looking at for the real estate series, and then we have other upcoming events. Aaron, I think you've got another slide on some of our upcoming events, including the economic and employment outlook for 2021 with Mark Melnick. If you recall, we did that 3 years ago, and Mark is a very engaging economist, which I think is a rare combination. And he does a nice job really bringing the economy to life and making it interesting. I don't know if he'll be as positive as he was in 2018, but I think it'll be an interesting conversation. So I encourage you to attend that as well too. And we'll send you information too about the town of Tewksbury, the town of Lexington will be doing some what's happening events for them as well too. So I think I'll leave it at that because I really want to get into today's conversation. And if we can go back to the slide on our panel as well, Aaron. So we'll put information in our chat about the coalition. And I'm going to encourage you also to use the chat box and to put your contact information, your LinkedIn information. We really are trying to use this as a way to keep and to grow our connections. And if you didn't attend our virtual networking, hopefully you will next time as well too. These are not ideal ways to do our networking, but I think that they're what we have, and I think the more we can do to continue our connections, the better. So this is our third webinar, a real estate webinar. The first two were on, one was on housing, the second one was on restaurants. And if you didn't have the opportunity to attend, we have them on YouTube. And I learned something new each time we have these meetings. So I want to thank our sponsors for making them possible, including AHP Architects, the BSC Group, Reamer and Bronstein, and Senate Construction. We greatly appreciate your support, especially during these times. And based upon our prep meeting, I think we have a lot to talk about regarding the future of warehouse distribution and last mile industrial. So I want to welcome and introduce our panel, including starting with our moderator, Demetrius Stanius, President of Land and Sea Real Estate, Bob Buckley, Senior Partner at Reamer and Bronstein, Rob Rose, Director of Client Planning at Senate Construction, and Steve Horan, the Leasing Associate at Farley White. Thank you, gentlemen, all for participating today. And Demetrius, Aaron, we can take this down. I hate competing with them. Demetrius, before I hand it over to you, I want to comment that you came up with this, and we're missing Steve here. We'll bring him back on. Demetrius, you came up with this idea about over a year ago, certainly pre-COVID. Sorry about that, Steve. And certainly when you thought about bringing the real estate stakeholders together and having this discussion, certainly it was a different format that you were thinking. And I think this format is working pretty well. That I'm thrilled with the topics and the discussion on how we're preparing for the changing real estate markets. And I think it's probably more important now than it was a year ago when we were discussing this. So I just want to thank you I want to thank you all for coming today. And Demetrius, thank you for leading the discussion, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Demetrius Spinaz. I'm the president and owner of Land and Sea Real Estate, along with my wife, Joanne, and we're a boutique real estate firm based in Andover, but we work all over New England, doing both commercial and residential, and focusing on investors and development. And as Stephanie said, we've been putting this real estate webinar together. But before I kind of get into that, I'd like to actually introduce the panelists we have for today, and because my discussion will kind of lead into our first question. So why don't I kind of go around and go to the man who, at least in my my little Brady Bunch Zoom thing here, is sitting to my right. So I'm going to go to Bob. And Bob, give us a brief introduction, please.
Yeah, okay. Bob Buckley, I'm a senior partner at Reamer and Bronstein. We do a lot of real estate development, a lot of, I would say, from the 495 belt in. We have projects going on in Marlboro, Randolph, Burlington, Billerica. We tend to do the larger commercial deals. And I know my partner, Mark Vaughn, is on. We've been doing quite a bit of distribution activities, last mile in the last year or so, although perhaps longer than that, to be honest with you. But it's we've been fairly busy. And just for Stephanie's edification, when she was talking about the economic analysis coming up, the seminar, the first 4 years of my career, Stephanie, I was an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So I plan on asking some very good questions at that one.
I'm sorry, Bob. You got to be careful what you say.
But being a lawyer is a second career. So. Thanks.
Excellent, excellent. Steve, why don't you give us a little bit?
Thanks, Demetrius, and thank you, Stephanie and Aaron and Steph, for putting this on. I'm happy to be here. So I work for Farley White Interests. They're a Boston-based developer, and they own 4.5 million square feet of commercial space in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida. And some of the products we own are what we're going to be discussing today, where it is perfectly situated for that last mile high bay warehouse. But any need, 1,000 square feet to 1 million square feet, we can figure it out. So if you're interested, ask Stephanie for my contact information. We can talk it over, and we'll make sure you get a holiday discount.
Cool. That's cool. Thanks so much. And last but not least, in many ways, because he's the only person on this panel who has his own publicist, Rob Rose.
Hey, thank you, Demetrius. My name is Rob Rose. I'm the Director of Client Planning at Senate Construction. We're a design builder, primarily focused in the commercial industrial marketplace. Our area of focus is Eastern Mass, Central Mass, Southern New Hampshire. We have a strong expertise in today's topic, which is building, developing, and leading entire projects from inception through permitting to construction for many of the warehouses and distribution fulfillment centers that we're seeing coming up right now. So definitely look forward to contributing.
Excellent. Thank you all. Thank you all. So, as Stephanie was mentioning, it was probably more than a year ago, it was probably a year and a half ago, we started talking about this, bouncing this idea around about this webinar series. And it got interesting. And with the advent of COVID, all the topics changed. This in particular was a topic, today's topic was something I was going to focus on anyway, but the dynamics of it have changed rapidly. Especially since with the whole thing of retail spaces being closed and the idea of distribution and warehouse and stocking and getting goods and items to people that can't go out is becoming kind of a major thing. Industrial, for this last real estate cycle, industrial was kind of the darling of commercial real estate. And investors were progressively more and more focusing on industrial, and lease rates were going up, and they were looking for more land and all this, and where the choice land would be for such things on these kind of centers where that you could get trucking, you can get rail and such like that. But in particular, the last 6 months, this has exploded, and I know many of my own investors who I work with have switched from office and retail, focused more and more on industrial. So, I think to kind of throw this out there, industrial is really kind of this overall term, and it really means a whole bunch of things. It can mean warehouse, and we're going to talk about the term warehouse, which has kind of become a dirty word in some communities where really, and we have more euphemistic terms for it at this point, which we'll get into. And also the idea of distribution centers and the idea of having areas where, retail can have their focus and they can send trucks out and they can make their deliveries. So I want to just open this up and just kind of, and think I'll start with Steve on to maybe go around and just start and saying, guys, what are you seeing with this kind of an industrial asset class and how it's growing, and where are you seeing this going?
Thank you. Yes, so I think we are. I couldn't agree more with those points, and I'm not saying anything novel here. Where a lot of this has been driven by the change in consumer behavior, and so I think Bob mentioned it earlier. This actually predated the current environment and the COVID environment, where there was a shift towards e-commerce. And I think what COVID has done is it has exponentially accelerated that change. And the way Farley White looks at it, and I think the way a lot of the real estate world is looking at it, is this change will continue and it will continue to accelerate. And as I was skirting around 15 minutes before this call, trying to grab some illuminating statistics, I came across an interesting stat that Deloitte pulled from a study they put together. And in today's world, over 65% of consumers have the expectation that they will get free 2-day delivery on items that they buy online. And that is such a different way to look at purchasing and delivery than 20, 15, really even 5 years ago. And so Amazon is certainly the horse leading this race, and they are making the biggest moves. They get the largest headlines, but nothing happens in a vacuum. So I think as the economy and the way we consume changes, the fulfillment centers, they're getting smarter. And as real estate providers, we have to get smarter to fill that need and that demand. And
Bob and Rob, you guys can just jump in at any time on this. And so I don't know, if you want to jump in and kind of your own views and what you've seen.
Yeah, I would first of all, I'm very lucky. I have a very creative staff, which I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge them, who come up with very creative ideas. Like I noticed, I mentioned Mark earlier, but Christine Hung and Melissa Cushing, we've been talking about this for years. I'm going to take a different approach. I actually am going to go back to what you said in the beginning, Demetrius, that warehousing and industrial has kind of a different view when you bring it up, particularly with respect to municipal permitting authorities as well as residents. They think of 18-wheelers coming in and out all day, kind of a trucking terminal. I actually think it's a high-tech center. If you've ever gone into any of these entities and seen the technology that they're employing for the processing of and distribution of their product, or it's an example of taking technology and employing it in a very sophisticated, creative, and efficient manner. And last night we obtained the approval of an Amazon facility in Randolph, and someone from Randolph asked a question about the commitment to the community, and Amazon responded that they're very engaged in STEM introduction and for the students and education opportunities. And then I reflected on that, and I said, you know, we did a facility out in Westboro that is just for robotics, just 400,000 square feet, pure robotics, where they develop robotics that is so sophisticated. And earlier, before we went on, we were talking about the Revere project, the NECO facility. That came to pass because we changed the definition in the city ordinances on zoning. I'm going to read something to you. You tell me if this is the definition of a traditional warehouse. Technology warehousing, this is in the definition of warehousing, and which is now as of right in Revere. Technology warehousing and distribution activity means the logistics and use of robotics in storage and distribution of goods manufactured on site or warehoused on site by various modes of transportation, including, without limitation, automation, freight carrying vehicles, and other means of technologies to the extent permitted by applicable laws. That to me is saying the way we deliver and demand the delivery of goods is changing at an astronomical speed. And those municipalities that change their perception of it, and that it really is a high-tech revolution going on, are going to be able to benefit, and that will throw off other industries and other technologies that will enhance the economy. But you know, it's not the traditional, you know, trucking terminal that so many communities, a lot of communities actually prohibit warehousing. So they've knocked themselves out of the market. But those communities that have the vision to try to be creative and say, this is technology, we should embrace it. We should regulate it, but we should embrace it. So there's a revolution and a sophistication that's going on that is under the radar screen, and many people don't pick up on it.
Yeah, and Bob, to your point, you know, the sophistication we're seeing requests from our clients for go well beyond, you know, a standard clear height, a standard amount of access, what have you. They themselves are trying to optimize their spaces. We're in the middle of a project right now where we had to come up with a solution on how we could increase the space on a certain footprint. And what we did was we worked with our client to design higher bay racking that would be accessible with an automatic storage retrieval system, which is similar to the robotics that you're talking about, Bob. And the end result was we had to find a way to make the floor, the actual slab, as flat as possible. So we introduced a super flat slab process. Short term, it may have added some incremental cost, but it gives it that versatility that as they continue to expand or potentially repurpose the building, this building is already set up to accept some of the state-of-the-art robotics.
And if you work for me, and I'm going to be repetitive here, Stephanie's probably heard me say it 1,000 times, everything is interrelated. So as we talk about the fulfillment or the warehousing or the technology that's being employed here, it's going to have a dramatic impact on retailing, which is trying to reinvent itself, so that in the future, when you go to a regional mall or a retail center, it may not be a 250,000 square foot department store. It may be an 8,000 square foot boutique type store where you walk in and say, I really, really like that jacket, but unfortunately you don't have it in my size. it's going to be, well, that's okay. We'll have it delivered to you by tomorrow at the latest. Now go have dinner, go enjoy some entertainment, and the quality, the different aspect of life. So it's going to be a very interesting revolution that everything is interrelated. How is it going to change housing patterns? It actually may have a positive impact on transportation. That's the other thing. These centers, people say, oh, we're going to have a distribution center. The traffic's going to be going all day. Surprisingly, they go off peak, and they're not that, the traffic, the actual numbers, when you look at it, is significantly less than you would have on comparable uses, retail or even some industrial uses.
Well, I want to say, you guys are bringing up great points, and I do want to kind of swing back to the Amazon conversation about all this, just because, and I think on this webinar and next month's webinar in retail, and that's why I wanted these two kind of in close proximity, because one's going to feed to the other. I think it's interesting as you were talking about Amazon and Randolph and kind of what they're doing, and some quick stats here. We're using Amazon's has 175 fulfillment centers and over 150 million square feet for this, which is needless to say massive. And I think, to be honest with you, I think Amazon's going to become a verb, kind of like Google has. I'm going to go Amazon this. It's going to be one of these things. So, I mean, I want to bring up, and I kind of want to throw this out there, and particularly if you're dealing with these large industries like an Amazon or Home Depot or Wayfair or one of these others who, as they want to place these fulfillment, and even the term fulfillment centers is a whole different thing. I think it's incredible. It deals with the consumer rather than, it's a very active engaging the consumer. But these fulfillment centers, and what are you all seeing is what they're looking for targets and where and what and how much, and do you see expansion happening in the Middlesex 3 region? So I know, Steve, you wanna jump on that?
Sure. So I think Rob brought up a good point when he was talking about how these buildings look and feel, and he referenced clear heights and column spacing. So I think while the fulfillment center of today is vastly more sophisticated than it was 20, 30 years ago, I think the focus for what the building looks like from the outside, it is a very tall building. We're talking about 30 to 32 feet of clear. We're talking about column spacing that's either 50 by 50 or 50 by 60. So you have these big wide open bays. So you can set up this high racking throughout. And then I think as far as a location, this is last mile. So they want to be close to densely populated areas. And this creates, I think, a major problem. And this is where creativity has to come into play, because close to those densely populated areas, there isn't a lot of wide open land. There aren't a lot of vacant warehouses that you quickly can modify to provide a high-tech environment for some of these sophisticated, deep-pocketed customers. And I think Bob will be able to speak a little bit more intelligently about this, but I know that some of Amazon's projects, they have been wildly creative, but also wildly effective. And down in South Boston, they're talking about converting the Blue Cross warehouse. And then in, you've got the Necco factory as well. And it's wild, but it's really any building that can provide the wide open spaces for them to be able to operate inside. I think they can effectively convert it to their high-tech fulfillment center. But I think what we want to stay away from is the idea that this is the white knight that will save everything. And just because all of a sudden third-party logistics or two-day delivery or e-commerce is a boom industry, that does not mean you can take a building that was built in 1990 for office space and convert it into a warehouse. I think it's about evaluating the location and the feasibility of that building conversion to make sure it makes sense, or else it's just a fool's errand.
I would agree with that. I think that's right on. I mean, last night, the deal that we had approved in Randolph was a former retail center. lack of a better term, a strip mall with two major retailers that, what Amazon likes to do on the last mile is the vans actually enter the building, are loaded, and exit the building. It's a very efficient operation, but it's a repositioning. But to Steve's point, a lot of buildings don't lend themselves that creatively to repositioning, and they want to, you want to be near major centers, and you want to have access to highways.
So Rob, I mean, insofar as that goes, in either the redevelopment and repurposing of buildings or the construction of new buildings, I mean, on the construction side, I mean, can you explain a little bit of the difference, or maybe the pros and cons to building industrial or repurposing, or what you're seeing on that insofar as costs or logistics?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of buildings in this area. They're in that 1960, 1970 era. And, sometimes they're even called flex buildings. And flex is this term that is sort of a catch-all. I don't know what it is, but it looks like a duck, sounds like a duck. It must be a duck.
All right.
And that doesn't apply here because you don't have the clear heights that we mentioned. Oftentimes the infrastructure is old. The building needs to be updated. The perfect sites for these, it goes beyond the building. It's the site itself. These efficient cross-docking fulfillment centers need a lot of space so they can turn their trucks off-street. They need to have significant loading docks so they can have a one-piece flow. Product is brought in one way, it breaks bulk, and it's shipped out on the other side. So these are the type of things that you need to find out there. I think from a location standpoint, Middlesex 3 is very unique. You're between two major beltways in 495 and 128 or 95. So it's attractive to these companies. The challenge comes down to the towns, the municipalities, and do they have these locations available? If they do they have the accessibility of the zoning to make this streamlined to move through fast in the eyes of the retailer that's coming into play? Amazon and others, they don't typically want to spend a year and a half between identifying a location and then permitting and building. So there's certain steps I think we can unilaterally take with the municipalities to identify these locations that may be highly attractive to these large distribution centers, close to highways, maybe minimal abutters, large lots, so they're not turning vehicles on the street. And I think the end point that we also bring in on that speed to construction is we do a lot of these facilities in what are called pre-engineered metal buildings. And the pre-engineered metal building has changed over the last 20 years. It used to just be a steel building, metal siding. The key to it is you can get those large open spaces without columns, but it wasn't necessarily attractive. And so it didn't maybe fit into the municipality. But we can turn around one of these from permitting through site work. We can typically have one up and running in this type of asset class inside of 9 months, which is very attractive to the folks that want to get these in place.
Well, it's interesting you're talking about the repurposing and looking for large lots. I mean, I had a client who was looking for 1.5 million square feet, to build a building that was 1.5 million square feet. I mean, that's one building that's 37 plus acres for one building, because that's all on one floor, right? I mean, you have to think about the size of some of these things. And then, when Amazon was doing their proposals a couple of years ago, they wanted to build a campus of 8 million square feet. I mean, to keep that in mind, downtown Lowell is like 5 million square feet. Like, if you put all the mill buildings and all that together, I mean, that's about 5 million square feet. So you have to think about the massive sizes of these things and how incredible it actually is. I mean, do you guys see a possibility of that happening in this region, something of that magnitude?
Well, the locations would be the 495 corridor and the Route 3 corridor. There are locations that if you could assemble the parcels that are close enough to particularly Route 3, I think the major impediments here is a provincial view that we don't want that type of entity in our community. It's going to detract from the overall values. And it's really the contrary, because it does create a lot of jobs and a lot of hidden revenue, because as I said earlier, the amount, as Rob indicated, the building itself is, you can construct the shell and the building relatively quickly as far as construction goes. It's the internal guts of the building, the technology that they put in the building, that is really the thing that takes some time. But they're also, and then the value of that building is enhanced. And there are hidden fees and revenue streams for a community. You take Amazon that has 75 to 100 vans, those delivery vans that are doing the last mile. That's $75,000 to $100,000 of excise tax to that community on an annual basis. There are probably 200 jobs that are attractive. And when you say, are you going to do because we did the NECO deal, that was almost 900,000 square feet. That was a huge building. When it was empty, it was almost intimidating. Couldn't get the smell of candy out for a while, but it was an intimidating building. Or the Home Depot deal we just did in Tewksbury and Billerica is approximately 800,000 square feet. They are large structures, but it enhances the value of the real estate around it simply because of the amount of technology that's being employed in those buildings. So.
Cool. And Steve, Rob, anything you want to throw in on that?
I'd agree with Bob on that, but I don't think the region needs it to succeed with this change. And I think both Bob and Rob were speaking earlier about the complexity of the guts of the building, and the industries that go into making these fulfillment centers function. Or you've got robotics, you have AI, you need data analytics. And those are not going to be run out of the high bay industrial building. I think that the robotics R&D could wind up in more of the conventional flex buildings in the area. I think that the software that runs the building could wind up in office space. And I also think that how these are going to continue to change hasn't been fully flushed out either. But we're talking about autonomous vehicles doing delivery. We're talking about drone delivery, stuff that 10 years ago might have seemed like science fiction. It now is not only are we wrapping our heads around it, but I think they're in beta testing in some parts of the country. And so I think the municipalities that are going to succeed are the ones that are creative and have the vision to understand the value that these businesses will add to their community. And it's going to require changing the wording of the permitting and the planning process and working closely with the stakeholders of that business. But I don't think we need a 1 million square foot development to come in and necessarily save us. I think that this area is doing great, but we can do even better if we continue to highlight the talented individuals we have up here and just attract more of these cutting edge businesses to the region.
I agree with Steve 100%, because what you want to do is you want to capture the technology. You can employ the technology in the guts of the building. As in our prep call, I called it the parasite theory, that you want the whale, but you want the parasites to feed off of that whale. And those are the engineers, the electronic engineers, the industrial engineers. I mean, that's an emerging field, where the process-oriented engineering, and we are rich in that talent. So what you want to do is you want to capture that, so that these major users, that they don't go elsewhere in the country to do it. They take our ideas here, they capitalize, they mine the talent here, and we export the ideas to other parts of the country to be implemented. We do have that knowledge base that is so important for that STEM or technology, whatever you want to call it. We just have to employ that and keep those users who are going to take that technology and export it elsewhere, coming back here to mine that talent.
And Bob, and just one point on Bob's, we have such a great resource in our colleges locally, UMass Lowell, as well as Middlesex. So, we've got the talent. I think, largely have the infrastructure, and it will go beyond just warehousing. Many of these facilities need also large call centers to support them, which brings in a whole nother level of technology. But I think it's also key that, and I know this group isn't because of what it's founded upon, but it's more than just a myopic approach of one town or municipality. It's multiple towns getting together. If one of these does land in X town, there's going to be such an infrastructure buildup in the entire surrounding community, as well as created demand, that it almost serves purpose to identify these locations within a given area, and then have the support that you could give to one of these companies outlined all the way from a permitting process through a construction process, if need be, as well as also providing them the human capital to operate those facilities.
Rob, that's an excellent point. We just did the Home Depot deal, which literally half of the building is in Tewksbury, half of the building is in Billerica, and a large portion of the site is in the city of Lowell. And trying to make two bylaws work together and address needs of all three communities required everyone to say, we're going to be cooperative because this is good for the region. And it was we went through the whole permitting process in less than a year on a complex program. That's federal, state and local permitting. So everyone was on board, because I do think that there's a realization that one community looks at it in its jobs, another community looks at it as technology and tax base. But you have to bring all those together. And let's not forget, some of these companies also have far-reaching technologies. Amazon has a tremendous web server presence, and that's technology driven. And where are we? We're on Route 3 with some of the best talent in the country in this corridor. So we have a lot to offer. I mean, I would be hard pressed to say you're going to get 1 million square feet on Route 3, but I think you're going to get smaller distribution, the last mile distribution centers, which are 100,000, 80,000 square feet. And you're going to get those who are going to invest in the technology to drive this industry. And a lot of things that we can't even anticipate. I mean, I think it was Steve who said that we have autonomous vehicles. I mean, who would have thought? And we don't even know how many are on the road right now as we speak, but they're out there. And before we got on, the drones, that's going to happen. Maybe not here as much as in less populated areas of the country first, but that's the future. And what technologies are going to come out of that?
One thing I want to bring up, and no, this is great as we're going. And you did mention size of buildings, and you're right. I don't think we're going to get 1 million square feet in this region by any stretch of the imagination. But as far as the supply chain goes, maybe people on this call don't know how this all works. Is that things get shipped? Let's say goods are either being developed in this country, or they're being shipped maybe from China or something on boats and these shipping crates and whatnot. And they go to these certain centers. They may go to, Los Angeles, and then these crates are shipped either by rail or by plane. And we're going to get into rail in a second as well. To maybe a large distribution center in Austin, Texas. That's where your big one, your 2 million square foot center. And then they go to the next regional center, which may be 800,000 square feet in New Jersey. And then, that goes to there. Now that's going to, service the Northeast. And that in New Jersey, then you go to the next, which might be, let's say let's use Billerica. Go to Billerica and you have your 75,000 square foot last mile center. So it is a supply chain. And I just want to just throw that out there for people that might not realize how that works. But you all brought up an incredible point and to emphasize that point is all the different types of jobs and industries that, you know, warehouse and distribution actually generate. So, you know, my question then is, if we're talking, you know, let's say, you know, as a developer or as an investor or as a corporation, you know, when you're talking to towns, you know, what it would be, you know, in essence, be the selling point, and, you know, and what would you want towns to do as well to help proactively, you know, entice these companies to come here?
Well, having appeared before a lot of boards on these types of deals, I would say that, and I don't want to sound trite or whatever, it's education. A lot of them don't understand what the business is. They think, oh, it's a trucking terminal. Why isn't this a trucking terminal? It's not. I mean, if you walked in and saw how, you know, product is sorted, delivered, and controlled, it's amazing. I mean, you get you know, some of it is, and they experience it, but they don't realize it. When they watch TV sometimes and they see these distribution centers and these robots or these automated pickers going up and down, they just don't understand what the uses are and how they interact with other potential uses that are going to be the future of the area. And look, that's one of the purposes of Middlesex 3, to try to have a collaborative discussion and say, where are we going? I mean, I remember the days, I'm going to show my age, when 128 was known as a technology highway. And that was known across the country, just as the Valley, Silicon Valley. Technology highway, but a Silicon Valley, I think, is 200 and some odd miles long. Our technology highway maybe is 15. But if we're on a per square foot basis, there's probably more innovation and technology occurring here. And it's more of an educational endeavor. And a lot of the zoning bylaws, even though we say they're, and I think Middlesex 3 has had an input and an impact on it, I still think there are a lot of archaic provisions in it. I mean, I can give you examples over my career where for years I used to go to meetings, I'm not going to name the municipality, where they would say, we want more recharge. We want you to put a structure in and recharge groundwater into the, surface water runoff into the ground. And you can put a structure in and allow it to occur. And finally, I kind of said, you know what, I'd love to do that too, but your bylaw specifically prohibits it. So, you know, take a look at what you have, what the operating rules are, and try to see how they could be, as Revere did, and they benefit. And Revere isn't Burlington, Burlington isn't Revere, and so forth and so on. But take a look at what you have, what you're trying to develop in terms of flexibility so you can react to the market, and then try to understand it. A lot of these communities in Middlesex 3, the most important thing they've done is they've gone out and hired economic development directors and staffs. And I would submit that their role isn't to hold someone's hand and say, come to community X. Their role should be to pick up the phone and talk to people on this panel or on the web that have knowledge, and say, what is the market doing? Tell what's happening out there. How can we capture that? And they should be encouraged to develop those contacts and reach out and go back to their boards and say, you know what we're seeing out there? That retail's in a state of repositioning itself, entertainment. And if we're going to do it, maybe we should lower the bar. I mean, on inviting life sciences into a community, or these types of technology distribution. And maybe it's not bad. Maybe that a large retail complex that has an area that is fulfillment driven doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Bob, the developers oftentimes when they approach us, one of our company strengths is in site selection and identifying risks. And the type of questions we're getting is, how amenable is the town to this type of this type of a product coming in. And I think if the towns do a lot of their advanced homework, which I think a lot of the folks on the call are doing, to set up, produce a set of guidelines that's readily available. You know, this is the zoning in this area for this type of a business. We want to help you get through permitting process in X amount of days, because this all becomes part of the overall economic strategy. When they look at these locations, is it going to take me 8 months, 9 months? Am I going to be waiting for variances? And it doesn't fit their model. The other piece is
town meetings to change the zoning that
yes,
can happen once or twice a year.
Exactly. And I think the next step is to maybe develop a set of architectural standards for this type of a building, so that, you know, it may be a very efficient structure, both in cost and longevity, but you could set a standard where it has to dress up to a community standard. You know, you want to see X amount of landscaping. You want to see this type of a building envelope. You want to see a certain amount of fenestration on there, so it looks a little bit more desirable.
Sort of a form-based zoning.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. You know, one other thing that I'll bring up. When I started doing permitting work, it was the normal template would be, okay, this is the emerging industry. Someone may come to a community and knock on the door of the town manager or the town administrator, whatever, and say, we're in the market, or we're looking for 100,000 square feet. This is what we do, and what do you have? And would, you know, tell us about your town. Doesn't happen anymore. What happens is someone says, okay, we're in the business of distribution. Let's take an Amazon. And they may be sitting in one of their headquarters and say, look, we need 3 or 4 facilities in Eastern Massachusetts. Go and research those communities that you think we should talk to. And what do? They do what we do. You go to Google and you type in robotics. Guess what's going to come up? A bylaw that has the word robotics in it. And they're going to stop and they're going to say, hey, that's interesting. In their definition of warehousing, they say delivery by robotics. Maybe we should talk to them. They understand what we do. They may be more welcoming. If you don't have that, you may never even get on that list in today's days. You'll never know that what list you weren't on. So you want to start thinking the way they're thinking and positioning your communities to get them to come and talk to you and say, what do you need? And look, sometimes you're going to say, can't help you. You know, our community doesn't desire that, or we just don't have the space or the appetite for that. But there may be those communities say, we have the site for you, and we can get you up and running within 9-10 months. And it's no longer the address, it's the operations that are driving the bus here.
Yes. So, you know, I want to give Steve a chance to jump in if you have any comments to this before I go to my last big question. So I don't know if Steve, you want to run with us.
I completely agree with both of these gentlemen, and I think one of the trends we've seen that isn't just focused on this industry, but is really across industries today, is developers as well as potential tenants. They value speed and simplicity, and they're willing to pay for those things. And so I think any town or municipality that can do something that's demonstrative of foresight, as well as a commitment to future economic development, it makes them incredibly attractive, especially to a group who, as Bob was saying, maybe they're making decisions from out of state. And if they're making decisions from out of state, they probably have deep pockets. So that's a group you want to get into your community.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So, you know, we're getting close towards our end time, but I need to throw out the, as I call it, the elephant in the room question.
Uh-oh.
Which is important. You know, about a month ago there was an announcement. I think it was on CBS, real estate show there that Amazon has been partnering with a number of large mall owners, into taking over big box retail spaces and turning it into either distribution centers or warehouse spaces. And in this area, as in every populated area, we do have a number of large malls. Some owned by Simon, which is one of the big companies that's partnering with Amazon. And so I guess the question is, what do we see kind of the future? And I don't want to make it a retail question. I do want to make it an industrial warehouse question of the repurposing of some of these large shopping centers into this use. And do you see it kind of happening? And do you see it being a long-term effect or just purely a COVID effect? And do you see that this changing anytime soon?
I think it's more than just a COVID effect. And early on, Steve talked about, people expect to be able to buy something, have it delivered in 2 days. I think traditional purchases where you had to see, touch, feel an item before you bought it, that's kind of gone to the wayside. So clearly retail as we knew it 20 years ago isn't the same. And you'll see that in the amount of retail closings that are going on. So they need to find, a solution for these buildings, whether it be to try to repurpose it, as you said. My initial thought as a builder, they may not be as easy to work with because of the ceiling heights that you needed for retail, certainly are much different than you need for bulk storage. But their existing buildings, they certainly could be repurposed into some level as maybe that last mile point where it's got a large, the bulk has been broken, and now we're trying to get it to the end user. And at the same time, I think Bob had mentioned earlier, maybe there is that retail in the front of it, and where someone still can touch and feel it, but they have a large space to have the fulfillment there. At the same time, they have large parking lots, which may present opportunities to build the larger base space that's needed to support it.
Yeah, and I do see some of the malls, it depends on the performance of the malls and the location, but some of the malls being able to integrate a fulfillment component to them because they tend to operate off peak. The 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. is their prime time where they sort and get ready to package, and the deliveries generally go out before the malls would even open. So, and you can hide them. You can hide them in the bowels of the it's the architects figuring out what's the skin look like, what's the exterior, and maybe it's in the interior that you take that space and you develop those opportunities. The problem with some areas like Eastern Massachusetts, the Route 3 corridor, the property is so expensive, and it's such the demographics are such that doesn't make economic sense. But there are locations that that have had malls that have closed, even in this area and the western part of the state, the southeastern portion of the state. There are underperforming assets that could be repositioned. I know a number of them that are being eyeballed right now to be repositioned. But is it the central location, the high-end malls? Maybe a component that you'll never really perceive because it is a compatible use. But it's something that I'm sure that there are smarter people than I looking at it saying, can we make this work? Because I don't know who brought it up. The parking is great because when you're parking the vans, which is generally overnight, is when the mall parking lots are empty, right? And then you bring them in the middle of the, early, the 4 a.m., 5 a.m. to start the loading process, and they depart before 10 a.m. So the parking lots then are available for the consumers. So there are some synergies that will probably be explored and worked on.
Steve?
I completely agree. And I think it winds up becoming a math equation, a complex math equation, but a math equation nonetheless. I think once Amazon, Home Depot, Wayfair is willing to pay for the space and generate more money for that mall owner than what they were making through retail, I think it becomes a simple yes, we'll convert. But as Rob said, is it feasible to convert these malls to serve this fulfillment need? But I think the bigger question is, what does this look like in the future? And I don't think anyone fully knows, but I think it will change. And there's a lot of interesting and innovative ideas happening now. And I know what Walmart's doing is they're using their existing brick and mortar locations to double as fulfillment centers.
Right.
I think out in South Seattle, they built on spec. They built a 600,000 square foot, 3-story fulfillment center, and everybody said, "You're crazy. Nobody's going to lease those top 2 floors." Home Depot took some of the first floor, and then Amazon leased the rest of the building. And so whether it is a conversion like Bob's worked on from a candy factory to a fulfillment center, or if it's more conventional, just ground up development, I think it all comes to, what are the dollars being spent and how is that company or that developer going to make it back?
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful, great. In the essence of time, I'm going to bring Stephanie back on. And I know there have been some questions, and maybe Stephanie, if there are any ones you think that we haven't covered, if you'd want to, from the gallery, if you want to bring a couple up, that would be great too.
Yeah, I will. And first, I want to thank you guys. This has been a great discussion, and I think you probably could go on for a long time as well too. And maybe we can, if people have questions and they want to contact you afterwards, I can give. I can make that introduction to continue the conversation later as well. But Tony Fields brings up a good question, and Bobby's talking about. You mentioned trucking terminals, and I think we talked a lot about. Bringing the municipalities along the process as well too. And let me just read what he says. Bob mentioned talking. We can change the terminology to distribution center or fulfillment center, but residents still object to the use of the perceived high volumes of traffic, even if the vehicles are downsized. Do you see the evolving technology overcoming some of the skeptics in town who are slow to accept the zoning bylaw amendments?
Yeah, first of all, that's a great question from Tony. What surprises me when you look at and you parse the data on the trip generation, I mean, it's a virgin site, new facility, yeah, there's going to be more traffic. But if you're repositioning, you'd be surprised that the traffic impacts are a lot less than most municipalities and residents anticipate. Now, a lot of it depends where the municipality allows it to be located. If it has to go through a residential neighborhood, that's an issue. And little things like gas stations. Do you have enough gas stations? That's an issue because a lot of these vehicles will want to, fill their tanks, and in the morning there's a line of 10 trucks at a gas station. I try to encourage them to put, if they can, put fuel service right on the site. But if you look at the traffic information, you'd be surprised. It's off-peak, and it's smaller vehicles. They don't all leave at once. There's a real conveyor belt aspect to how they load these vehicles and where they go based upon routes. But it's an educational aspect. A lot of communities have been burnt, as I said earlier, by warehousing or distribution. It's trucks coming in and out all day. It's not like that. And someone with Tony's talent, maybe it's to employ someone like him to try to educate the community as to what the impacts would be. And a lot depends where it's sited to. You don't want them going to residential neighborhoods, but you'd be surprised at the difference in an otherwise permitted use. For instance, in the project we did in Randolph, yes, the difference in daily trips is over 3,000 trips between a retail center and a distribution center.
Can I throw one more question in before we wrap up here? Because Eric Salerno from the town of Tingsboro, and Eric, if I don't get this right, you let me know, but he's asking regarding the different sizes of these distribution centers. I mean, you talked a lot about the larger ones, but there are also some of the smaller ones as well, whether it's 500,000 square feet or 100,000 square feet. Do different companies gravitate to different areas, or
Demetrius hit it right on it's a supply chain. You start big and you start, it's like the decision tree. As you get down, the last mile could be anywhere from 60 to 100,000 square feet. And then you go out to the Colorado or Utah where they have actual 2 or 3 million square foot facilities where the trains actually go right through them. So, I mean, it really depends on where you are located on the supply chain.
But it's really in essence, the supply chain is no different than a retail supply chain if you think about it.
Yeah.
The stuff that we might get in a Macy's is not, it's still coming from a warehouse somewhere.
Right.
It's or Whole Foods.
A traditional warehouse.
Right. Traditional warehouse. It's really no different. And so, I think that's something that a lot of folks don't realize is that we're already dealing with supply chains. It's no different.
Right. That's absolutely correct.
I'm going to sneak one more question in because we have one more question. So I'm going to try to get to that. So can any of you gentlemen discuss any research that you've seen regarding the noise, safety, or security regarding drones? Or is that a subject for another meeting?
Drones. Huh.
We should have someone from Northeastern discuss that.
Nancy, I think you stumped them.
Yeah.
Northeastern has a drone research facility.
Right. Nancy, I think that'll be a discussion for another day.
Well, that might be an interesting question because, and I don't know the answer to this, and that's why we throw it around. Does each municipality have its own rules regarding drone delivery? And if that's true, then suddenly now you start creating flight patterns. It's like, well, you can just randomly you can fly over North Andover, but you can't fly over Haverhill because they have a drone ordinance. I'm just using those for example cities, but is that an issue? And what constitutes delivery by drone? Yeah, I think it is an issue because it's another thing. If it's going to take the place of a truck and of a human driver, what are going to be the regulations of that? And,
right.
and what are the safety issues of that?
Right.
And insurance.
So maybe that leads to I'm wrapping up here because we're promoting for the next segment, which is the future of retail. And I'm sure that's going to be a discussion for that one as well, too. So
right, just in time for the holidays. And that's why I planned
just
it.
Just in time with all you planned it perfectly. So I want to wrap up first, but by thanking the panel, Bob, Steve, Rob, Demetrius, thank you all for coming. And this has been a great discussion and a lot for us to think about. So I thank you for your time. Thank you to our sponsors, Senate Construction, AHP Architect, Reamer and Braunstein, and the BSC Group. We greatly appreciate our sponsors and their support. And we've got a number of other upcoming events. We'll just send you information about that because I know everybody has to get back to work and get outside because it's a gorgeous day out as well too. So
yeah, I have a 2:30 meeting on a distribution facility west of here. So
get going. Hopefully you won't have any
problem. Ready to go.
That's right. That's right. Wonderful. Well, thank you again for everyone for joining the discussion. And if we're missing anything, and if anyone wants to be on the panels or if there are other discussions, please let us know. Just give us a call. We'd love to hear from everybody as well too.
Right. Like these panels aren't set in stone, and it's really kind of, I might suggest somebody, or Stephanie might suggest somebody else might say, hey, I want to be on that, and then becomes, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's a good dynamic combination of folks. So
the economy's changing, so we need to change
right.
with it. So,
right.
Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you again, gentlemen. I appreciate all your insights, and we'll have a great day.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
All right.